This is Greg Fowler for Online London, and I'm with Jared Zaifman, who's a candidate in Ward 14. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
If elected, how many hours per week on average do you expect that you'd spend working in your elected capacity?
As many as necessary, depending on how many people sort of need me in my time span, whatever the needs might be, as well as obviously going to committee of the whole, as well as the other committees I might be serving on. Like I said, whatever my time might need to be spent.
Do you think ward councillors are currently paid enough for the amount of work that they'll do during the next term of city council?
I think it's definitely sufficient, especially as a part-time job. I think to talk about changing to a full-time job isn't necessarily, I think the amount of time they're spent is what it is and what it should be. And changing to something like full-time, I think, is more just talking about a pay raise, which I don't think is necessary.
London's governance model is undergoing significant change, and of course, that includes elimination of board of control. Do you think this will increase the necessity for ward councillors to inform themselves about issues outside of their own ward boundaries?
Most definitely. Without board of control, we only have one elected official that's citywide. So ward councillors now more than ever are going to have to stop being, if they weren't before, but selfish, and really have a focus on the city as a whole. But at the same time connecting sort of with the ward so they can sort of keep a focus on both.
Do you live within the geographical boundaries of the electoral area in which you are contesting this election?
No, I don't. I actually live in Ward 13, but I feel as though Judy Bryant is doing a good job in the ward, and I feel we need to have as many good people on council as we can possibly have, and that is why I've chosen to run in Ward 14.
How many of your post-teenage years have you lived in London?
This will be my 6th.
Have you attended any standing committee meetings over the course of the last 4 years?
I have not had the opportunity.
Have you attended any board of control meetings over the last 4 years?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the Municipal Act and the Municipal Councillor's Guide?
I don't know it front to back, but I'm definitely familiar with it.
Strengthening Neighbourhoods recommended development of a neighbourhood matching fund type program for large and small community projects other than celebrations and events. Do you support that recommendation?
I think it depends on what the money or what the funds are going to be going to, but I think looking at it on a sort of case-by-case basis, I think if it could really enrich a neighborhood, I think there's definitely worthwhile time spent on that.
What maximum per project amount do you think that the city ought to contribute to it?
It's a tough question to answer. I pass on that just because I don't quite know what a number to put on that would be.
Do you support development of a community program to fund the creation of public art in public places?
I think as long as we don't go overboard, but I think there's lots of also local artists that we could be definitely showcasing, and public art can be a great use of sort of beautifying an area and something nice to see and look at.
Should the City of London and its boards and commissions embrace the concept of making their data open and accessible to everyone as often as is possible, and adopting open standards for that data?
Most definitely. I think someone like myself coming on and trying to become a city councillor, being able to access information, and as well as people just wanting to know what's going on, just to be able to have easy access whenever they feel like it to see what their councils are doing, what's happening in the city, I think is essential.
When existing software applications have to be replaced, or when software licenses have to be renewed, should the city adopt the use of open source software whenever that's possible?
I guess it sort of depends on whether they see it fit that the open source is, I guess, a better use of the software, or if there's better use in having paid software, whatever might be the better software.
Do you think the city's communication department is being given enough resources, money, and personnel to properly maintain the city website and to inform citizens in a timely fashion?
I think to the extent that people use it, I think that there could be more resources spent on the communications department, especially with the website. It's a tool that's very easily accessed. I think to make sure that we have a strong, efficient, and accessible website is very important.
Should citizens be able to subscribe to subject-specific RSS feeds from City Hall in order to stay informed?
I think if that was a possibility, I think it would be great. RSS feeds are a great way of accessing subjects and interests that people have. To have that would be great.
Should citizens be able to download the agendas of upcoming public meetings, including advisory committee meetings, at least a week in advance?
I definitely think so. I mean, to have access to that and to be able to be aware of what's going on is very important. And it's unfortunate right now the fact that people have to pay for agendas when we're having to use so much paper in that, which is just unnecessary.
Despite the requirement of the Municipal Act that all City Hall meetings be public except for specific reasons, It's been argued that they most often are not because of the inability of the public to hear what's being said. Do you support the adoption of a policy which mandates the use of microphones in all public meetings at City Hall?
I would have no problem with that. I think if someone wants to hear, they should have the ability to hear. I personally sit on the Committee of Adjustment. If anybody has issues, we're happy to talk on the microphone.
Do you think that the City of London ought to be webcasting all of its public meetings?
Definitely. I mean, I tend to watch on Rogers TV, but that's sort of the only access we have. I know for a lot of people, some people don't have Rogers, and to be able to watch online any meeting you'd like from anywhere you sort of have access to it would be amazing.
Should the city's boards and commissions be webcasting all of their public meetings?
I see why not, as long as there's no legal issues being discussed.
Do you think that the chairpersons of public meetings at City Hall ought to have to announce motions and amendments to motions and the number of votes for and against those motions so that the public can understand what's taking place?
I think the more we make meetings understandable to people and accessible so they have an understanding as to what's going on, the more the better, I say. So yeah.
Should London hire an Auditor General?
Yes, I think there's definitely merit to looking into that, having someone within our own sort of employment, being able to always be here and look at that, and rather than having to hire people consistently from an outside basis.
Should homeowners have to pay a percentage of the cost for the repair of damage to underground infrastructure on their own property that has been caused by city-owned trees?
It's a good question. I've never really thought of that before. Obviously, we want to maintain people's homes, we want to maintain the infrastructure. At the same time, if it's the city's fault, then potentially it should be the city that's paying for it.
Do you agree with the placemaking concept of neighborhood gateways?
I had the opportunity to study urban planning, urban design when I was at Western in little courses. And I think placemaking is definitely an interesting concept, something that it should be definitely looked into and be utilized as much as possible. To the extent that the cost sometimes might be too high, I think there needs to be a balance though.
Should there be increased user representation on the London Transit Commission?
In any sort of commission that has people responsible to it or people using those facilities or services, it makes the most sense, I believe, to have more people giving in their input that actually use those services, because that's the best source of information we can get.
If the City of London is going to provide venture capital to businesses, should the city be guaranteed a return on its investment in the event that those businesses become profitable?
I think most definitely, if we're going to be investing in businesses, there is a reason that we're doing that, and that's to have a return to the city. Obviously not making it too harsh on those businesses so they have the opportunity to grow and expand and become a healthy business, but I think in the long term to have returns from them, I think is definitely essential.
Should people be allowed to naturalize their lawns?
That's a tricky question, and going throughout the city, everyone has different opinions on that. I don't know if I'd necessarily be in total favor of that.
Are London's pedestrians and pedestrian issues sufficiently represented at City Hall?
I think there's definitely lacking, as we talked about before. I think there's always more need for pedestrian or for individual input from people that are using the facilities and the services the city has. I think the more the better, and obviously we can't have too much because it'll get overloaded, but I think to have more people on committees where input could be used would be great.
The traffic and parking bylaw prohibits people from using any sidewalk for any purpose other than pedestrian traffic, except as specifically permitted. Should downtown patios, which consume most of the width of the public sidewalk, be permitted?
I don't think so. I mean, when we're going downtown, we want to have pedestrian-friendly, sort of nice sidewalks, beautiful sidewalks. We obviously want to make sure that businesses have the facilities they need, but to the extent that it might be encroaching onto the street, it's not necessarily the best thing.
When closure of a public sidewalk for construction purposes takes place, what steps should be required to ensure that pedestrians are not forced out onto the roadway in a manner which puts them at risk?
I think if it's possible to try and make sort of a temporary sidewalk, even if it means sort of cutting into the road, but setting up pylons or some sort of blockage to the road that would allow for access to individuals, it would make things a lot safer. I know myself personally, sometimes it's hard when you're walking on the roads and having to cut across and almost into traffic at times.
Is the warranted sidewalk program sufficiently funded?
I would love to answer the question, I just do not know enough about it.
Is the warranted walkway program sufficiently funded?
I will have to say the same thing for that one.
Old unlit streets are not lit unless there's a local improvement program application and cost sharing amongst the owners. Do you agree with that policy?
I think there's definitely a reason that the city should be potentially investing in these areas, largely for safety reasons. I know knocking on doors, talking to people, I've ran into some elderly people in certain neighborhoods that are sometimes afraid to go out at night because of the fact there is no lighting in the neighborhoods because it's an older neighborhood. But there's no reason that I think there shouldn't be more.
Do you think that London Police ought to be provided with special funding for the purchase of additional speed watch radar trailers and the cost of having the auxiliary police unit deploy them on a frequent basis?
I think that should be largely dependent on, I think, how speeding is in the city, and if we see a serious problem with it. I think if it's coming sort of out of hand, then I think definitely trying to enforce it a little better does not hurt at all.
Should the city be spending as much as it is per year from the federal gas tax to construct on-road bike lanes in London?
On-road bike lanes are great for people in the city. I mean, making a city more bicycle-friendly, pedestrian-friendly is something that I think is going to need to happen, and over time is going to be more useful as gas costs gets higher, prices get higher, people are moving into the core. Bike lanes are going to be necessary, and it's a great way to get around the city.
Should bicycles be allowed on the public sidewalk?
I think so.
Should persons in motorized wheelchairs and other mobility devices that are on the public sidewalk be obliged to yield for pedestrians?
I don't think so.
Should the City of London install more bike racks?
I see there's no harm in that. I mean, I know from a personal perspective, working with my family's business where we have bike racks outside buildings, the only concern is theft, but as long as people feel safe putting their bikes in those places, then the more the better.
Do you think the theft of bikes is an important issue?
I definitely think so. It's unfortunately something that's sort of hard to track and try and cut down on, just because of the fact that to actually maintain that would be having to put cameras in a lot of places. The upkeep of that would be very difficult. But I think community watch programs and people being aware is very helpful. So I mean. Yeah.
So other than those that you've already mentioned, any other suggestions about what might be done to combat the problem?
Not off the top of my head.
Is the City of London currently spending enough money to promote its web-based ride match service?
I'm not sure what that is.
Should there be dedicated and discounted carpool parking spaces on downtown streets and in city-owned lots?
I think that would be an interesting program. I'd be curious to see how it works, but I think to try and increase pedestrian-friendly streets and to try and get more people walking and sharing and carpooling to reduce their carbon footprint, I think is great. If we can do that, that'd be amazing.
Should every signalized London intersection provide advanced left turns?
I think it's dependent on the traffic at each intersection. It's also dependent on the time of day. I know there are certain intersections in London where I would love to see an advanced traffic or advanced left, because you wait forever at 5 o'clock when it's just, if they put it up for 5 seconds, I think you would get lots of cars through. So I think it's also on a case-by-case basis, but something we should be definitely looking into more.
Does the city provide sufficient funding for the Community Gardens program?
Community Gardens program is a great program. I think the problem with it is not so much the funding with it, but the lack of, awareness about it. Talking to someone actually this weekend, they were doing their own gardening in their front yard because they didn't have a backyard to do it. Finally finding out about the Community Gardens was great, but it was just actually finding out about it that was the problem.
Should dogs have to be muzzled when they're not on their owner's property?
I don't think so. Unfortunately, I think there are some dogs who are more dangerous than others, but for a large part of through the city, I think people keep good care of their pets, and I think just hope that they keep them in control.
Should dogs be allowed at community events?
I think so.
Do you think people ought to be able to raise chickens in their backyards?
It is a great question. Unfortunately, from what I know from the research, I just don't necessarily know enough about it. I think there's definitely causes for certain people to have them if it's something that helps them out. I know the case a while back with someone who used them as their pets for therapeutic uses. I know also there's some people that use them and it's very useful to have your own eggs and things like that. To the extent though that it might cause noise pollution, smell pollution, anything like that, may be detrimental, but again, I just don't necessarily know enough fully about the project that I would be in favor of at this point in time.
And that concludes the interview. Thanks for your cooperation.
Thank you.